Hi, my name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at TheFortuneSOC. Today's show is titled Stones of Hope, the Fight for Our Leaders of Tomorrow. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, nearly 53,000 youth are held in facilities away from home as a result of juvenile or criminal justice involvement. Nearly 1 in 10 is held in an adult jail or prison. Even residential placement programs are not suited to effectively house and care for youth. Thousands of youth are held before they've been found delinquent, many for nonviolent, low-level offenses, even for behaviors that aren't criminal violations. My guest today is Germain, co-founder of Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow, and author of A Stone of Hope, a memoir. Jim has worked with countless local, state, and federal officials advising on matters related to juvenile justice, mentoring, mental health, substance abuse, and educational issues. Jim, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me, brother.
So let's start off by talking to our viewers about your organization, Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow.
Yeah, so PLOT, Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow, as stated, was a passion project of mine. As a young man, I spent 3 years in the juvenile justice system. I grew up in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, made a lot of bad decisions as a kid, which then led me into the system. And one of the things that I realized worked for me as a young man going through that process was having mentors in my life. People who were dedicated, people who never wavered their commitment to my well-being and my safety, people who saw things in me and extracted those things, things that I couldn't see in myself at the time. Because as a youngster, at times it's hard to see the gifts and the treasures we have within us, especially when we're surrounded by brokenness. So for me, when I got out of the system, I went to college and started working with young people in the same facility that I was in as a kid. I realized that the process was slow and was mundane and it was long. I noticed that the kind of impact I wanted to have on young people as a youth care worker in the facilities was not being achieved fast enough for me. I knew that lives were being impacted, you know, kids were dying, families were hurting. And so I thought to myself, man, what was the most important thing that happened during my darkest days? And for me, when I thought back about it, that thing was mentorship. Again, people stepping in and exposing me to a different world and exposing me to things that I wasn't aware of as a kid. And I knew that was what really helped me make it to the other side. And, you know, 3 of those individuals, 2 of them were my lawyers, Christine and Marty, and one was actually my dean in junior high school. And so when I thought back about those individuals, I said, man, how can I replicate that? You know, how can I go ahead and continue that process and find brothers like you and others to train them and get them ready to have an impact in young people's lives? And so that's where the thought about plot and mentorship came about.
And how old were you when you went through the juvenile system?
I was fortunate, man. I got in trouble with the law 4 months shy of my 16th birthday. As you know, prior to Raise the Age, which is a bill you and I worked on very hard, if you were 16 and 17, you committed an infraction, whether it was violent or not, you ended up on Rikers Island. You know, we know the Khalil Browder's case and everyone else that went to the island, simply because they were 4 months older than me, right? I mean, what's the difference between a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old? There's none, scientifically. So for me, I was fortunate that I got in trouble with the law right before my 16th birthday, so that's how I ended up in the juvenile justice system. and I ended up spending 3 years there.
Wow.
Originally, I was sentenced to a year,
Wow.
but I struggled a lot during the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second year, the prosecutor took me back to court and got me a second year. And then the third year, what happened is I got very lucky. I got accepted into a program. It was like a group home. It was a rehabilitation home. It was located in Park Slope, Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really kind of turned the corner and
Wow.
changed my life.
Yeah. And so what is some of the work that Plot is currently doing right now as we speak?
Yeah, so we wanted to ensure that we were doing things a little bit differently than the big brothers and some of these giant mentoring organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to be as real and as authentic as possible. We understand that the youngsters we're trying to touch are coming from some of the hardest places there is to live. We understand that the challenges are way beyond simply, going to a baseball game or having ice cream or, playing ball in the park. We know that these are kids at times that have adult responsibilities, that they are heads of households and kids that are trying to escape the level of violence we see in many of our communities. Because of that, we wanted to be targeted and very specific. We wanted to provide a level of mentorship that it was individualized. And so right now we have adults we've trained. All sorts of individuals can become a mentor with us as long as they pass a traditional background check for child abuses, things. Other than that, if you have a criminal record, that doesn't stop you from becoming a mentor. As a matter of fact, we find that as an asset. So that's what we do. We just go into the communities, mentor these youngsters. We build a relationship with their families. We understand that the family is a unit, and for most part, sometimes you can help a young man, but if mommy is struggling or daddy's struggling or the community's struggling, it's hard for that youngster to accept that help. So we provide mentorship, college preparation, and job preparation for youngsters.
And actually there are a lot of mentoring programs, and especially the bigger ones, where if you have a criminal record, you're excluded from actually being an active mentor, despite how long ago that conviction was, despite what that conviction was for. And so it's very interesting and inspiring to hear that Plot is doing that specifically. So how could folks who are watching and they say, I would love to be a mentor with Plot, like how can they learn more about that?
Simply just go to plotforyouth.org, PLOTFOR youth.org, and you can be a partner, you can be a mentor, you can be a supporter, you can simply be a volunteer. We're looking for help, and we're trying to grow. Our next phase is to start mentoring young women. It's extremely important for us. So, just go to plotforyouth.org and holler at us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So how did Plot kind of create the springboard for what would ultimately be a memoir that you penned called A Stone of Hope?
Yeah, when I was in juvie, when I was in the system, 3 books, in addition to a constructive and conducive environment and those positive role models I've mentioned earlier, the other thing that did it for me was reading. The first book I read in my life was a book called The Pack.
Wow. Were you a reader, an avid reader before?
No, I had never, I barely knew how to read a sentence or put a sentence together. Never read prior to entering the system. It was just one of those nights. I was in my room early because I had gotten in trouble. I had to be in bed around 6:30 during the summer days. The sun was still beaming.
Wow.
And I'm like, man, I can either stay here and be angry or I can just try to read a book. And it just happened. My roommate had a book and I picked it, opened it. I laid my eyes on these words and I'm like, man, these dudes are talking about my life. It was the first time where I was reading about my own life on paper. And I was just captivated. And man, I finished that book in about a week. I struggled at first. I would read sentences over and over again. I would have to stop and find a dictionary and look up words. And then once that happened, that's it. You couldn't keep me away from a book. The second book I read following that was the book that really, really changed my life. To me, it's the most important book ever written. Was The Autobiography of Malcolm X.
By Alex Haley.
By Alex Haley. That was special in many ways, man. Malcolm was special to me. just opened my eyes up to so many things, including the history of America and the level of oppression we deal with here. But most importantly, his ability to go through challenges and ups and downs and still rise and become one of the most impressive kind of figures that we've had as a civil rights leader. And then following that, I read Dreams from My Father, which was Barack Obama's first book, President Obama's first book. And in there, I remember telling myself vividly, I can remember lying on my bed, looking at the ceiling saying, man, one day I'm going to write a book. Because I think what these 3 books has done for me, I can use my story to do that for another young person. And I just filed it in my head.
Yeah.
Next thing you
and
know,
how old were you at that time?
I was about 16 at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old were you when A Stone of Hope came out?
I was 27 when A Stone of Hope was published. Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly about 10 years later. What's interesting with A Stone of Hope is my former attorney / mentor / father figure / everything, Marty Feynman, his wife Amy was having dinner with a friend she went to school with who happens to be a literary agent. And it just brought my name up and they brought Plot up, and Marty is a board member and founder of Plot with me. And the agent said, wow, that sounds like an amazing young man, an amazing story. I would love to meet him. And her and I went out, we had lunch, and then the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what is A Stone of Hope, right? Like, if I'm pretty sure you have ways of describing what the book is.
Yep.
But I would love for you to do that.
Yeah.
But also talk about like the name.
Yeah.
Like where you landed on the name for the book.
Yeah. The name came about as I was on Capitol Hill actually advocating for a particular piece of legislation that was called the Better Option for Kids Act. It was sponsored by Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. It was a bill that aimed to divert money away from the legal criminal system. I don't use criminal justice system because I don't think the system delivers justice. I think that word does not deserve to fit into the criminal justice profile. And a part of my job was to go to Capitol Hill and do some, supporting of that bill and some advocacy. And the bill died, didn't even make it out of the committees.
And what year was that?
It was around 2015, 2016, not too long ago, 2015. And so out of frustration, I went for a walk. It was a really crisp September night in DC. It's one of the most beautiful seasons. And so I took a walk on Capitol Hill and I ended up at the Dr. King's monument. And as soon as I entered the monument, I remember it was a night and there was a light shining on the side of the monument. And the quote on the side of it said, "Out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And it was just fitting for that moment.
A quote that was attributed to Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep, one of Martin Luther King's, most famous quote, "Out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And I saw that, I was like, wow, that's fitting. I needed that at the moment. And it just happened that I was writing this book at the time. So I wrote about that moment. And then my editor saw it and said, oh, you know what? That's the name of the book, because I think your story fits that. And so that's how we came with the title.
And so what is A Stone of Hope?
A Stone of Hope, I think as a young black and brown man in this country, hope is essential to our well-being. There's, one of my favorite quotes is from James Baldwin. I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, if you're a black man in this country and relatively conscious, and you're not always in a state of rage, then that means something is wrong with you, pretty much. And so I think as a young man, black and brown man in this country, injustices are all around us. There's so many things that are constructed and designed to destroy us. And it's important that we keep hope alive. I mean, we literally need it to live, right? So for me, my journey was just that. I moved to the States as a kid from Haiti. And when I was in Haiti, I was painted a picture of America that was from Hollywood. One of my favorite movies as a kid in Haiti was Home Alone with Kevin. And all I can remember was that Joe Pesci, would try to break into this $2 million home. And I'm like, man, I would argue with my siblings and say, hey, man, when we get to the States, can you believe that the hardest job we'll have is keeping Joe Pesci out of our $1 million homes? Man, I came here, dude. I got dumped in the hood, poverty, broken home, violence, despair, broken schools. And as a child, I didn't really know how to deal with that. But I was always good at adapting to my surroundings, which is what I did growing up in Crown Heights. Unfortunately, I adopted all the wrong side of my neighborhood because there are a lot of positive things happening there too. But as a kid, those things weren't appealing to me. And so that led me down a really dark path, losing a lot of friends to the streets, and again, ended up in the system. And this book pretty much traced that journey from a young boy in Haiti growing up in abject poverty to a young man in Brooklyn, New York, trying to survive and assimilate into this world, then making my way into the juvenile justice system, then beating that and being the man that I am today. So I've just tried to capture all of that in this book, A Stone of Hope, to really, to really me packaging my experiences. I believe that experiences are meant to be shared, not to keep to ourselves. At least that's my philosophy. When God gives you certain experiences, I think you share them with others, and that's the most selfless thing you can do, is to tell someone else, look, I've been through these traps, but I was fortunate enough to make it out of it. Here's what I'm giving you so you can try to avoid it. That's what we do as parents. So that's what I try to do right here in this memoir.
So that's what I was going to ask you to, talk about how it seems like your work with plot, your writing of A Stone of Hope, all of the other work you do around juvenile justice, mental health, so on and so forth, how all of that accumulates in the way that you parent your son.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. The greatest teacher, as you know, is experience, right? When you've seen certain things, you've been through certain journeys, and you've lived as we have, you have a different kind of appreciation for life and for the smallest things in life. And you know the line between being here on this chair and being 6 feet under or 25 years in is very thin for us. And once you know that, I think you cherish your kids and your child in a different way. I mean, that's an obligation for us as brothers anyway. You know, we live in a country where our kids may not come home simply because of the color of their skin, not because of anything else they've done. And so when you know that's the reality, you have to give a level of attention to your child and raise them in a certain way, hoping that, you can help them avoid some of these pitfalls, because that's really the best you can do. And so I use all of that experience to really try to teach my son. One of the things I do with my son is I tell him, I notice that a lot of parents emphasize to the kids how brilliant their kids are. I'd flip it on my son. I try to tell him how kind he is. Intelligence comes after. I want him to be emotionally intelligent. I want him to feel what other people feel. I want him to be kind. And then, intellect, you can always accumulate that along the journey. You can be brilliant and you're a bad person. As we know plenty of people who are like that. So I try to use a lot of those experiences, man, to give him that journey, and also let him know that he's not above anybody. Any given moment, anything can be taken away from you. And human beings are the most important commodities we have, not things. So, that's really helpful in that sense.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit about your work with the Obama administration and the task force that you are still on. When you come from our world, there's certain things you experience in life, you still have to kind of pinch yourself sometimes. And working with the last administration was one of those things. I first got involved with the Obama administration through the My Brother's Keepers initiative. When Trayvon was killed down in Florida, the president made that statement saying if Trayvon was, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin, which he caught a lot of fire for. Out of that
came his initiative to uplift young black and brown boys throughout the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going in D.C. and working with Senator Chris Murphy and
Mm-hmm.
Congressman Bobby Scott. So some people had sort of like saw my work and
Mm-hmm.
saw my advocacy on the Hill and suggested that the president and people would reach out to me. And so I got a call one day from the White House.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at the phone. I was like, somebody's tricking me.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, I was on a train to D.C., went to the White House, met with the president and advisors, then started being an advisor on what some of the things we can do to help young black and brown boys. Out of that came the police task force
Mm-hmm.
around a lot of those police shootings, which I had an opportunity to be on that task force also.
Mm-hmm.
That, we went around the country, interviewed police officers and community organizers and just folks. And I was one of those individuals that testified to the task force. And from that, the president appointed me to a position on the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council for Prevention and Delinquency. And pretty much there's a body in the federal government that has 9 members. 3 are appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, 3 are appointed by the Speaker of the House, and 3 are appointed by the President. I was one of the ones appointed by the President. And so the goal was to use federal fundings and follow whichever states were practicing models that we think were helpful to helping kids who are sexually trafficked, kids who are in a foster care system, or kids who have been impacted by the juvenile justice system. Thousands of kids around the country. And once we target those youngsters, then we would try to use the power of the purse to help states do more of the good works that they were doing. And that was a huge deal, man, to be appointed. There's a handful of people in the world that's been appointed by the President of the United States.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, 2016 came around. This dude won the election. That's it. Everything's been crushed. So instead of actually doing that work, we rolling back many of the policies that were put in place to help youngsters. So one of those things is, disproportionate minority contact, which was one of the main things we were working on, was no longer one of the priorities for this administration. So it's been heartbreaking, but we're still trying to do the work locally, as you and I know.
Yeah. So, given what we've seen around youth and particularly youth organizing, I think about organizations like the Black Youth Project. I even think of the high school students who organized after Parkland in Florida. How do you see the role of young people, and young classified as 14 to 18, who, despite class and social backgrounds, that is an age where all too often you're told to just sit down and be quiet. Right? Like you don't know, you're still learning, don't talk, just listen. But here you are investing in youth in a way that's like actually is the opposite of that. And so, how do you see the state of affairs for youth now, given everything that they have to face, including the potential of just being shot for going to school?
And for us, that potential exists every day, right? In some of the communities we come from. I mean, the answer to that is it's so clear cut, man. I mean, youth are the future. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but if you're 14, 18, what it means is that your entire life is in front of you. That means that those individuals in position of power now, if you look at Congress, for example, the average congressman or the average senator is about 70-something years old, meaning that in the next 20 years, these people won't be here. But yet somehow they're making policies that will outlast them for about 100 years. Right? So those youngsters, if anyone has more stake in the game, they do, we do.
Got it.
Nobody has more stake in the game than we do in many ways, especially when you talk about marginalized youth. We know that when the hammer comes down, we're gonna pay the highest price. So I'm a huge believer that it's important for youngsters not to ask permission to lead. We have to stand up, volunteer, raise our hand and do the work. We can't ask the folks who are trying to sidetrack us the permission to lead and the permission to fight for our future. We just have to go for it. So it's on us, you and I, to empower them.
Yep.
Not empower because they already have the power, but to support them, to help them get there. So one of the biggest things I do now is when people reach out to me for work, to speaking engagement and other things, I always try to guide those individuals towards young people also.
Yeah.
Right? I don't run in as if I know it all. I meet with young people. I say, hey, I know a youngster also who's 19, 18, who may be very useful in this topic. So it's important that we share that stage with them and we support them.
Yeah. So in the last 2 or 3 minutes that we have, I would love for you to just talk about like what's next for Jim St. Germain.
Yeah, you know, if you asked me this 5 years ago, I would jump up and say politics.
Yeah.
But you know, as you know better than most, Khalil, as you get older, man, you realize that your job and your purpose is to serve. And sometimes you may have your own idea in which capacity you want to serve, but you know, the person above or you know, whatever that figure is may have a different plan for you. And so I'm just open to serving in whichever capacity I can do that. You know, that may be writing, that may be advocacy, that's never gonna go away. That's what keeps me alive. You know, maybe it's running for office, maybe it's, you know, you hiring me and making me work. So I'm just open, man. I'm just willing to make a difference and roll my sleeves up and hit the ground.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
and
man.
so how can our viewers get in touch with you, learn more about you in the last 30 seconds that we have?
Jim St. Germain on Facebook.
And how do you spell Germain?
Germain.
Got it.
No E at the end.
Yeah.
A Stone of Hope is the memoir, so please pick up a copy. It's available everywhere books are sold, including online. So
awesome.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you,
Jim,
man.
thank you for being our guest.
Man, it's an honor, brother.
Here today.
You're my inspiration, man, in many ways. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Man. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in The Fortune Society. This is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I appreciate you joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars.